Welcome back to the channel. So I wanted to answer some questions on video regarding the transmissions on Ford Fiestas and Ford Focuses from 2011 Fiesta through 2018, and same thing with the Focus 2012 through 2018 or so. They basically have the same transmission. Now Ford Focus and Fiesta have different transmission housings, but it's basically the same clutch and same actuators. Same TCM, just a different program seems like. And so if you get a TCM off a Fiesta and put it on the Focus, it won't shift right unless you reprogram it. Now if you get the TCM with the same part number from a Focus and put it on the Focus, it will work. It will just relearn on its own if everything's working properly. But I'm actually making this video to explain that when I say I will buy your Ford Focus as is, I mean I will buy it. I'm not open to public, so I will not fix your car, unfortunately. Maybe in the future I will choose a random person here and there just to help out and repair their transmission to get them back on the road. But the right way to fix these cars is actually to remove the transmission and replace the clutch, the forks, the bearing, the TCM. That's the right way to do it. What I've been showing is, I don't want to say a temporary fix because it actually works for a long time, but you know, I just don't want to throw bad ideas out there. So this one here is a 2017 Ford Fiesta with the 1.6 liter non-turbo with that transmission that's got the dual clutch, and it has issues. It doesn't have reverse. Now I've already tried, as you can see, the airbox is out, and I've already tried to replace the TCM and the actuator. This one is saying that the clutch B cannot be engaged, and it seems like it's a mechanical problem inside the transmission. Now it's not the fork, because I did make sure the fork is tensioned, and it is. So at this point the transmission's got to come off. I'm thinking that the bearing that pushes the clutch B is actually broken. I've seen that before. I didn't see it at 60,000 miles. I've seen it at like 150,000 miles. But you know, it all depends how the car was driven. And I picked this one up for a good deal. I'm not gonna say the price because a lot of times I buy these and fix them and sell them, so I'm not gonna throw the price out there. But I'm sorry if I didn't answer some of the emails I've been getting. It's mostly because I can't answer every question out there. So what I'll do is I'll try to answer the questions that I've been getting on this video here. I'm gonna show you how to remove the transmission in your own garage. And as you can see, I'm in my own garage drinking a sugar-free Red Bull first thing in the morning because I'm tired already. It's only like 9 a.m. So I'm gonna go quick. I'm gonna try to remove this transmission, and we're gonna see what's actually wrong with it. So first thing you're gonna want to do is lift up the car and put us on some jack stands in the front. Only lift in the front. Then we're gonna go remove the wheels because we gotta pull the axles. That's, to me, probably the hardest part. I wouldn't say it's hard, it's just time consuming because sometimes the ball joints don't want to come out, so it takes a little bit of time and you gotta tap it with a hammer. Now the difference between a Ford Fiesta and a Focus, like I mentioned before, the transmission housing is different. So on the Fiesta, it's easier to pull the engine oil pan off and get to the flywheel bolts. Now on the Focus, it's easier to remove the intake, which is pretty simple, and then you can get through the starter, and it's easier that way. But on the Fiesta, I like to just pull the oil pan off. Most of the time I change the engine oil anyways, so all it is just a tube of RTV, and then you essentially reseal the oil pan, so you're doing, you know, the car a favor, so it won't leak in the future. Now also go ahead and disconnect your battery. That would be the first step. Someone just replaced this battery not long ago. It's a 2021, almost a 22, so it's a brand new battery from Ford, which is nice because I'm guessing whoever owned this car thought maybe the battery was weak, which is a thing that kills the TCMs on these cars is actually the battery. If it's a low battery or weak battery, it could possibly damage your electronics, starting with the TCM or the actuators and so forth. So let's pull the battery out, lift up the car, and get going. 19mm socket and an impact. Take the wheels off. And what I like to do is when I remove the wheels, I put it underneath the car like this for extra insurance, because I'm usually alone working on this, and jack stands are jack stands, but they don't always hold is what I'm hearing. So alright, let's get the other wheel off. So next we're gonna take an 1.25" socket to remove the axle nuts and put that aside. And I always check on the brake pads. These look like they need to be replaced. They have like 20-30 maybe % life remaining. So same thing on the other side, just remove the 1.25" nut off the axle. And we're gonna pull the axles first, but before you pull the axles, make sure you drain transmission fluid. And I'm also gonna drain the motor oil, since we're removing the oil pan on the Fiesta. So if you are just removing the original parts and reinstalling them, that's what I'm doing here. Is I'm gonna be reusing the clutch. You have to have some tools, which are, this is a clutch reset tool to reset your original clutch. And I'm sure at 60,000 miles on this vehicle, I can just reset the clutch and be good with that. If it had over 150,000 miles, I definitely would probably want to put a different clutch on. I have some used ones sitting around. So this will reset your clutch on the bench, and this actually removes the clutch. And this tool everybody was asking about, it's a 6mm spline tool. This is what moves the forks. This end is basically your actuator motor. So this tool actually came with my kit. I've never bought it separately, but I did find it on eBay, and I think I have the link in one of the videos, and I'll try to remember to put it in this video as well, so you could just get the tool. But I recommend just buying the whole kit. This kit is actually much cheaper now. I paid like $250 or $300 just for this, and then I had like $200 for this. But you can get both of these, I believe, off Amazon at this point for like $300 or less for both. So I mean, it's way cheaper than taking it to the dealer. And you can also, if you don't need them, you can always sell them. So I do recommend buying these two tools just to have. So next we take a 15mm socket and a 13mm wrench. We're gonna remove this ball joint right here on the bottom. So you wanna go ahead and remove the nut. It's a bolt going through. I'll show you exactly what it is, but we remove that right here, and then we just take a pry bar and move this down. By this I mean the lower control arm. So this bolt is what goes through the spindle, and it holds the lower ball joint on the lower control arm. So once you get the nut off, you take the bolt out, and now you could take a pry bar or some kind of long bar and just pry that right out. So I take a pry bar and I stick it in the hole in the lower control arm back there. And this one is a bit rusted, seems like, so it doesn't want to budge. So what I do is I take a hammer and I hit, I put tension on it, and I hit it right here by the ball joint, and it'll free that right up. So once you get the ball joint out, actually this one was pretty tight, so I had to blast it with a EB blaster, and just keep prying it. This one was pretty seized. So the axles usually push out pretty easy, but if not, what I like to do is just put the axle nut back on there, give it a couple turns, and then I have this bar here. I just put it right in there and tap it with a hammer a couple times. It frees up pretty easy, usually. If not, you can put PB Blaster in there. As you can see, this one came out pretty easy. So you're able to pull this back enough to get the axle out. See? So you don't have to disconnect the tie rod ends or anything. Just lower ball joint is all you need, and then you pry that out. And I put the nut back on the axle just so I don't damage the threads while it's laying around. So this axle is the short one on the driver's side. You take a pry bar and just pry it. Don't damage the seal or the little shield back there on the axle. So gently pry it from there. It snaps right out. But before you pull the axles out, don't forget to drain both fluids, the motor oil and the transmission fluid, which is right here. Transmission's right here, and the oil's obviously in the engine pan. So transmission drain plug is a 5/16 Allen wrench, and I like to drain it in a clear container like this because I want to see if there's any metal in there. These transmissions don't hold much. It looks pretty clean, normal. And I went ahead and took the engine oil plug out as well, and it is draining. This one is still dripping. In a minute or so, I'm gonna put the drain plug back in and keep going. So I get the question a lot as well, if I replace the fluid in the transmission, will it help my shifting? In this case, it will not, because the fluid in these transmissions have nothing to do with shifting. It's basically just gear oil. It just lubes up the gears, that's all. Everything is being shifted by the TCM and the actuators and the dual dry clutch. The clutch is dry, so the fluid, like I said, is just to lubricate the gears inside the transmission here. So it's like basically like a differential fluid. I mean, don't get me wrong, it doesn't hurt to change the fluid, obviously, because it does wear out. There is going to be some, you know, normal wear, but it will not help your shifting, is what I'm trying to say. But still do change the fluids. So now that the fluids are drained, you can go ahead and take a pry bar on the driver's side axle, and just keep in mind, don't damage the seal. It's usually easy to pry out like that, but sometimes you want to put a pry bar and maybe tap it with a hammer lightly, and it'll come right out. There's a retaining clip in there on the end of the axle, which I'll show you in a second when I pull it out. So there's just a retaining clip right here on the end of the axle that goes inside the transmission, and that's what holds it in place. So just keep in mind, do not damage this shield or the seal in the transmission, because you will have a leak. So the passenger side axle is the long one, and it's held midway with this half clip, whatever it's called, and there's a bearing, pilot bearing. So you want to remove that, and the dealer says you cannot reuse this retainer clip here, but I do, and I haven't had any problems. I mean, if you do it a bunch of times, I guess it would be good to replace, but I think it's fine. And since there is a retainer clip halfway on the passenger side axle, once you remove that, the axle comes right out. And you just set it aside. And again, I like to put the nut back on because you don't want to damage those threads. You don't want to buy an axle unless you have to. These are in good shape still, low miles. So now that we got the axles out, I'm gonna do a little bit of work under the hood here. The PCM on these cars is bolted to the side of the battery tray, and it is plugged in with 3 connectors, and there is a plastic cover that's covering it. So you just take a 8mm socket and remove that 1 bolt and take the shield off. Put that aside. Just label your bolts. I already know where everything goes, but label them so you know how to put it back. And then you just take a 10mm and remove the 3 bolts that's holding the battery tray down. Once you remove the 3 bolts, the battery tray is loose, and you can go ahead and disconnect the PCM and just get this whole tray out the way. Once the tray is out, there's 2 8mm bolts holding this wiring harness. You want to remove both of them. Also set those aside. This way the wiring harness will be out of your way. And then there's this bracket that holds the battery tray. It's held by 3 10mm nuts. You want to get those out of the way so you can get to the transmission mount right here, and it'll give you more room to work with. So on the 2013 and up Fiestas, they added a ground, but I don't think the 2011 and 12 has this ground. But this ground is very important, so make sure you remove it, but then reinstall it. So I'm gonna remove it. It's a 10mm bolt. Remove it and put the bolt back in as a reminder to reinstall this ground. One time I forgot to install this ground. The car wouldn't even start because there was no ground to the TCM. So very important ground. All grounds are important, but this one especially. So now there's a shift cable that goes from the inside, from the shifter. And all it is just needs to be pried and removed. It's just a clip, and then there's a bracket here that's held by 2 10mm bolts right there. I just removed the 2 bolts and removed the whole bracket, because if you try removing the cable from the bracket, number 1, that bracket's going to be in your way later, and number 2, you could possibly break the clips if they're pretty fragile, especially if they're dry rotted on the older car. So just remove those 2 bolts and remove the whole bracket off the transmission. So this is the bracket that holds the shift cable. It's just held by 2 10mm bolts. Remove those, and over here you just take a pry tool and just pry it off, and it comes right off. It's just a clip, that's all. Alright, so you have to disconnect one upper connector off the TCM. That's the one that's part of the engine harness, and the bottom one just will stay on the transmission, because there's a separate transmission wiring harness that's connected to all the sensors, which is pretty cool. So just the top connector on the TCM is all you have to remove. These TCM connectors are pretty fragile, so be careful with them. If it's not moving, if it's stuck, just wiggle it back and forth. Don't force it, because you will break it, and then you'll have to replace the connector or the whole wiring harness. So be careful when you remove these. This one came off pretty easy, but when I reinstall them, I spray a little bit of silicone onto the gasket here, and it's easier to install and remove in the future if you really have to do it again for some reason. So just keep that in mind. So next step is to remove the engine oil pan, and some people will say, oh, why are you removing the oil pan? You don't have to do that. But I know I can remove the starter and get to the flywheel bolts, but it's just such a pain to get in there. You'll probably have to remove the intake, and then, like I said, on the Fiesta, it's much easier to just remove the oil pan. There's only, I'll say, like 12 bolts or so, and then you just reseal it. This one is not leaking, but I've had some that leak, so you're actually doing, you know, the car a favor by fixing the leak as you're doing it. But this one is not leaking. The only leak I see is from the oil filter. Someone didn't tighten the oil filter all the way, and that happens a lot because it's such a tight spot for the oil filter. So removing the oil pan is all it is 4 bolts that hold the pan to the transmission, which are 13mm bolts, and then there's like 10 to 12 10mm bolts going around the oil pan. So right now I got them all removed. All I have to do is just take a screwdriver, pry it right here lightly, and it'll come right off. And so now, as you can see, you have access to 2 bolts or 2 nuts at the same time on the flywheel. So all you have to do is just remove the 2, and then I take a screwdriver and I rotate it. Just be careful not to damage it, but this is a 4-cylinder, so you just take a screwdriver and you can turn it easily. So it's a 13mm. So there's 1. There's 2, and there's a total of 6 of them. So you remove the 2, rotate, rotate, and you're technically supposed to replace these nuts as well every time, but I reuse them. I'll replace them if I'm replacing the clutch. So now that we got all the flywheel nuts off, all 6 of them, all we have to do now is, it's still held by the transmission mount up here, and then another transmission mount at the bottom. We'll leave those on for now. We're gonna go around and remove all the bolts around the transmission bell housing, and then we'll get to the transmission mount. So now we can go under here and get this lower transmission mount. So I forget, but on the Fiesta there is another ground right back here underneath. It's on the transmission right there. Right there, there's that ground in the transmission, so don't forget to remove that and reinstall it later. Okay, so one last thing is the transmission mount up top. 2 18mm bolts or nuts. And right now I have it sitting on the jack on the bottom. And just gonna lower it and let it fall. Sometimes you have to pry it a little bit right here. Perfect. I do find it easier to actually use a engine hoist to sort of lift it up and then lower it to the bottom, because the transmission will not go through the top, but it'll go through the bottom. So just have the hoist up here and then hook it up. There's a hook in the transmission, and just lower it down. But that's how we're gonna install it. It's easier to do that because it's one person. It's hard to line everything up. So, but removing it, just let it fall. So on these newer ones, there is a triangle on the flywheel right there, and there's a triangle on the clutch. So that's, you have to line those up exactly, otherwise you'll have some vibration going on. Now on some of the older Fiestas, I noticed that they don't have that triangle on the flywheel. They do have it on the clutch, but not on the flywheel. So I still like to mark it, and I did that with some spray paint before I removed it. So just keep that in mind. Just spray it just in case it doesn't have the triangle, which this one does. So we're good to go. But I did still mark it with some paint. So this is what the transmission looks like on the ground. The clutch looks pretty good. It may have been replaced. I don't see any evidence of it being replaced, but this is a low miles car. It's only got 60,000 miles or so. So next step is to go ahead and remove the clutch, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. So first you start with this retainer clip here that holds the little gear in. It's not hard to remove this one. Of course it can fly in your face, so just set that aside. That will be reused. Then this guy comes out, right? And it is marked, so you have to put it back just like it was. So there's a mark there, so you want to put it back on the mark when you're assembling it. So on the 2013 and up Fiestas, they added a ground, but I don't think the 2011 and 12 has this ground. But this ground is very important, so make sure you remove it, but then reinstall it. So I'm gonna remove it. It's a 10mm bolt. Remove it and put the bolt back in as a reminder to reinstall this ground. One time I forgot to install this ground. The car wouldn't even start because there was no ground to the TCM. So very important ground. All grounds are important, but this one especially. So first you start with this retainer clip here that holds the little gear in. It's not hard to remove this one. Of course it can fly in your face, so just set that aside. That will be reused. Then this guy comes out, right? And it is marked, so you have to put it back just like it was. So there's a mark there, so you want to put it back on the mark when you're assembling it. Now this second clip can be a little tricky to remove. I'm sure there's special tools for it, but I don't have them. So screwdrivers and a pick, and usually I can get it out that way. I just put a rag on top so it doesn't fly a million miles away, because it's one time I lost one and found it 3 months later. But I always have extras laying around just in case. Come on, guy. There we go. Alright, so the clip is flawless. It's not bent. They say not to reuse them. I do it. There's nothing wrong with them. Now, here's the part I wanted to show. I'm always excited about taking this clutch out to see what's actually damaged. Usually I'm too lazy to use that puller. By puller, I mean this kit right here. You put that plate on and you start pulling the clutch. This is how I do it. Check this out. I just take the whole transmission, right? Flip it over. Flip it over again. And just drop it. Boom. The whole clutch is out. And now we get to see what's broken, and just like I thought, the B bearing broke off. This is supposed to be one piece, but as you can see it broke, and it wasn't pushing the clutch B at all. So everything is working properly, but this piece gave out, and that's why we had no reverse or second or fourth or sixth gear. So easy fix. It did take some time. It took me about 2 hours to pull this one because I was recording. Usually I can get this transmission out in less than an hour. I usually do like 2 of these a day, but so I have another one of these. No big deal. I'm gonna reset the clutch. I'll show that also, and then I'll show you how to put the clutch back in the transmission. But I'm not going to show you how to put the transmission back on the vehicle because it's basically just reverse of what we just did. So
Very cool. The clutch looks like it's in good shape still. And if you look on the sides, you can see the discs usually, and they're almost new looking. So we're gonna reset this one and put it right back in.
Okay, so we're gonna reset the clutch at this point. Just remove the bearings, the nut, put the clutch on here. Anyways, so this goes on top. Bearings, nuts, drive it down by hand, right? Then take the smaller circle tool, call it what you will, and then you turn it clockwise. As you can see, it's spring loaded. See how it's spring loaded? So when you turn it, what you want to do is hold it. Turn it all the way till it stops and hold it. Then you tighten this nut. You're compressing the clutch. You turn it till it stops. Then you don't need this tool anymore. Set that aside. As you can see, it's compressed and it's engaged. There's 3 tabs around. You gotta hold them all at the same time. So what I do is I have a PVC pipe that's about 1 foot long. I hold that one with the PVC pipe. I hold these 2 with my fingers and I loosen the nut. And as you can see, now those 3 tabs are holding the clutch engaged. So we can remove this nut here, bearings. I'm not gonna need this anymore. Now you take this piece and you find where it fits. It'll only fit one way. You can't put it any other way. Has to go in the grooves. Once it's in the grooves, put the bearings back on, put the nut back on, hand tighten. Now, take the bigger circle and you find there's cutouts. You find the clutch little teeth that you can twist. Again, also it only fits one way, so if it's not fitting, then something is wrong. No, I don't like how that's moving right there. This may be a bad clutch. First time ever. 1 in a million. See how it gets stuck? It's supposed to go back, but it doesn't. That may be why that bearing failed. It doesn't. It sticks. The clutch sticks. That's not good. Okay, so after further inspection, it's actually not the clutch that's sticking. The clutch is in good shape. It's just the tool. The tool is so perfect around the clutch that it holds the clutch, and that's what's holding it. So anyways, you put the tool on and you go counterclockwise and you also have to hold it. So I just put my hip right there, I'm holding it engaged. Now you tighten this and then you're gonna hear it click. A lot of times it's gonna be clicking. Yeah. So you go all the way till it stops, you can't turn anymore. Now, clutch is engaged, you can remove this tool. See how it holds them in place? It didn't jump back. So now all I have to do is release. That's it. The clutch is officially engaged. And you want to double check and make sure all the pins went into holes, and it's looking good. So the clutch is set. So again, if you're trying to reset your original clutch after removal, you have to buy that reset tool. What it does is it compresses the clutches and holds them in place by some tabs and pins. And once you install it into the transmission, you have to turn A and B actuators 14 times to release the clutch, but that is after it's installed in the transmission. If you install it without doing this, it is not going to work. You're going to have to take the transmission apart again. Trust me, it's happened to me before, and that is why I know so much about these transmissions, because I learned the hard way. You know, don't be me. So before I install the clutch, I want to make sure that the forks are moving freely. So I'm going to take the actuators out, which I have to do anyways, before reinstalling the clutch. So there's B. There's A. A's on top, just so you know. B's on the bottom. And now I'm gonna grab that tool and spin these forks and see if they work. So if the forks are working properly, you can just turn it by hand like this until it stops. Don't force it. Once it stops, that's it, right? And then you just pull it out and the fork goes right back. These forks are pretty much new. They work flawless. So there's fork A. You can see up here. Look at that. It moves, no problem. So I'm gonna check B now. I've got it engaged now. I'm gonna release it. Boom, it goes right back. But these forks are flawless. I'm not even gonna take them out. Just gonna leave it as is. They look good. It looks clean in here. I blew the dust out. So now we can reinstall the clutch. So reinstalling the clutch is a pretty easy process. All you have to do is you take some grease and put it on the forks where they're touching the bearing, the push bearing. And once you do that, you put the bearing in like that. So we're good there. Everything went in flawless. And then I like to put some grease on these bearings as well. Don't go crazy with grease so it doesn't sling it everywhere, but why I'm putting grease on this is so those plates, there's two plates for A and B, they go on there and they'll stay on. Make sure your transmission is pretty leveled, and so this one goes first, the big one, and it'll stick to the grease just like that, and then the smaller one right there, which is B. So A is the big one and B is the smaller one. So now they're stuck to the grease there.
and we should be good to put the clutch in. Before you put the clutch in, also put some grease on here where the bearing of the clutch goes. It'll make things easier to press in. And if you do want to save some money and not buy the kit that removes the clutch, I'm gonna show you how I put it in without the tool. So you just take the clutch, you flip it, and just drop it in like that. Boom. It goes in. Some people have special handles. That tool that I showed earlier actually helps you install this, but you technically don't need it. You really need the reset clutch tool, which we just did that. But to reinstall and remove, you technically don't need that whole set, and I'll show you why. So all you need is this guy right here. So you have the clutch sitting in there, so you have to press this in, and that plate typically will go on here. You bolt it down. It's just too much work and it takes a lot of time, and I like to do things fast. So all you need is probably a socket that'll fit this bearing there, and you can notch it so you can see how far it goes. And all you do is you take a hammer and lightly tap it. Tap it until it's a little bit below the shaft, and then you could take your C-clip or the clip that we removed earlier and put it on there. It's much easier to put on than to remove. As soon as I say that, it doesn't want to go on. Okay, come on now. Cooperate on video. Just need a bigger screwdriver. I don't know where I put it. Okay. So the clip is on there, but it's not seated all the way. So now that the clip is on, you take the socket that you have, and you keep tapping it lightly. Don't go crazy, just tap it a little bit at a time. Okay, perfect. And once you see that clip sit in its place, that's as far as you want to go. The other way would be to put that plate on, bolt it down, press it in a little bit, then remove the plate, put the clip on, do this again. But I've realized that tapping it like this, just make sure you don't go crazy. Just lightly tap it. You don't want to damage anything. You don't want to damage the bearing. It doesn't take much force. It's just that you tap that in, and that's it. And the next step is going to be putting this little gear back on. Make sure it lines up with the mark. Boom, fits right in. And then this last clip, you gotta make sure that where your mark is and your cutout on the clip is, you put it right in between the cutout. And this one is super easy to install. Again, take a screwdriver and just put it in there like that. Boom. And you spin it. It's good. Now, so this is the part where you release the clutches inside. Now that everything's installed, all the clips are in, you take your special tool. Mine came with the kit. Again, it's a 6mm spline tool. I did see these on eBay, and I'll try to remember to put the link in the description this time, because I did get the most comments about this. Nobody wants to buy the whole kit, and I understand why, because I just showed you that you don't need it. All you need is a socket that fits that, make a little cutout in that window so you can see how far you're going. Don't force it. Don't force anything. It'll go in. If it's not going in, something's wrong. So I'm gonna release clutch A. So all you do is you put the tool in and just a regular ratchet, and you go 14 times. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And you can hear it click in there and stuff, so that basically released the clutch. So you can slowly release this by hand. Boom, clutch A is engaged, or I mean released. So now we'll move on to clutch B, same thing, 14 times. I think you could do a little bit more. Again, don't force it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. When that clicks, that means it's released. So when you slowly let go, the forks are moving properly, no issues there. So now the clutch is good to go. There's no noise. The actuators can actually go back in, and what I do is, and the Ford manual also says to put a little bit of grease right here. So I believe it seals it better, because my thing is there's no o-ring or anything on this, and moisture, water can get in there, and that's what messes up the forks as well. It's not just the dust, it's a combination of things. Don't take a hammer, don't beat on it. For some reason this one's not fitting. There it goes. Okay, so you just keep turning it until it falls into place. If you force it, you're gonna damage your actuator and probably your forks. So we got A and same thing with B. I don't know the torque on this. Everyone's asking me for torque. I rarely use a torque wrench because I've done so many of these, and the fact that I'm reusing all the bolts and nuts and stuff like that, I don't think torque would be accurate anyways, so I just go by feel. If you do want torque specs, I'm pretty sure you can just get them off Google, or I could probably look them up for you. So just like that. So the clutch is in, actuators are in, everything is looking good. The transmission's ready to go back in, and I'll show the process of it actually going in. But after that, it's just reverse assembly. So let's get this in there. Okay, so I find that easiest to just take a pigeon hoist and all I do, I have a strap already with a loop. I hook it onto the transmission. There's a hook at the very top center of the transmission. So you just take a hook and start lifting it. So as you're going up with the transmission, just make sure your triangles are lined up on the flywheel and on the clutch. Otherwise you may have some vibration. It will work if you don't line them up, but you might have some engine vibration. And you don't want to do all this work and have issues. So do it right the first time. And this part is easier with two people, but I've done it so many times that
other person just gets in the way.
So the engine and transmission is back together, and all I have to do now is just reconnect everything and reassemble everything, put the axles in. One thing I forgot to mention is when you remove the transmission, make sure you support the engine so it doesn't hang too low, because it could damage your motor mount. I've done it with and without supporting it. It doesn't really damage the motor mount, but you don't want to damage that thing because that's an extra thing you got to replace. And also don't forget your grounds, and make sure you connect everything back like it's supposed to be. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn the camera off, reassemble this, and within the next hour or so we're gonna go ahead and start this thing and see how it drives. Alright, so this 2017 Ford Fiesta is complete, and what I did was I checked the codes after connecting the battery, and there was no codes. You don't really have to relearn with the scan tool. If everything is working properly, it will learn on its own, and it's shifting smooth, everything is working. So in my opinion, this was an easy fix. It, you know, takes a couple hours of your time, takes a little bit of tools, no big deal. But even with those tools, it's still cheaper than taking it to the dealer and paying $3,500 where they replace everything, but you know, a lot of times it doesn't work. So stay tuned. I will have a video on removal of the transmission on the Ford Focus next. I have one in line to do, so stay tuned, like and subscribe. Later.